Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Significance of public policy. Now that we have seen the constraints in public policy, why is public policy important? Let us just briefly see the significance of public policy. The reason why it is significant is for various facets. We'll begin with the first, a purposive course of action in dealing with the problem. Now, as we can see, when there is a problem and there is no new roadmap for the same, public policy bridges that gap to come up with a solution-driven approach for that particular problem. Second, it helps the government in making an informed decision and to develop strategies as to how to overcome that particular issue or concern. It also facilitates collaboration and consensus among various stakeholders, which is one of the most important tasks that any government performs, because a government is not a single entity, it is a multitude and purposive entity that runs into various facets. It also brings in a democratic participation. India being a democratic country, it is very important that the voices of the people is heard. What the people actually want, that is given and delivered to the people by the government. And that is the reason they choose their representatives. So once the representatives, they come and represent the people, the same should be facilitated. Next, socio-economic development and the wholesome scheme of national integrity is very essential in this regard. Also, on the larger picture, public policy plays a very critical role in nation building. Today, if we see the steel industry, that is a robust industry in India, again, it is a gift and the ideology that was formulated because of strong policy decisions that were taken years and years back. India took a policy decision to open up its doors to the world economy. The 1991 reforms that took place, globalization, liberalization, all these are policy decisions that were taken which affected where India stands today. Today, when we aspire to become a $5 trillion economy, it is because we can aspire, because there is a vision that we have seen. We are working on a policy through the self-reliant India, the idea of the current Prime Minister and the ruling government. And when you have an order in place, it makes the journey easier. Therefore, public policy plays a critical role in nation building. On the professional front, it understands the causes and consequences, and on the political front, there is adoption of right policies for the right goals, which brings us to the utility in this regard, which is by far one of the most critical elements in public policy. Now that we have seen the various dimensions of public policy, let us analyze a few judgments and see how the courts have actually went ahead and discussed a bit about public policy. Let's take up the case of State of Punjab and others versus Ram Lubhaiya Bagga and others, a 1998 judgment. In this case, the court held that government policy based on facts, laws, constraints, or resources expert opinion, they test the utility and the benefit of the policy. So courts rather do not enter the realm of the executive, and hence there is a separation of power in the government, which definitely does not lie in a watertight compartment, but there is definitely a separation of power. The judiciary is a guardian to the constitution. The executive is someone who will execute what the legislator legislates. So the case law was very clear as to who should formulate policy, and courts should only see as to if the policy is against public order or public morality, and rather not enter into the realm of the executive, wherein they come and try to execute or try to legislate wearing the boots of the legislature. The next case, Federation of Railway Officers Association versus Union of India. In this case, the court clearly held that judicial review of public policy is limited, which means that if the government takes up a decision, the courts will have a limited jurisdiction to actually review that action of the government. Now, if the public policy is related to something technical in nature and if it falls within the purview of the legislature, it will depend. Thus, judicial review is inconsistent with constitution, arbitrary, irrational use or abuse of power. Only in these circumstances will judicial review kick in and the courts will come into action. They will spring into action when they will see a particular policy is against the spirit of the constitution or is against the letter of the constitution by far means, or it has arbitrary or irrational use or abuse of power. Next, quite a not per se a very recent judgment, but a judgment in film festivals versus Gaurav Ashwin, Jain, and others. In this case, the court held that courts and not appellate authorities will check correctness, suitability, and appropriateness of a policy. Courts are not advisors to the executive in matters of policy, and public policy is reviewed on the touchstone of violation of fundamental rights if the policy is violating a provision in the statute or there is a clear-cut manifest arbitrariness in the policy that has been formulated. So these are some of the critical elements in which a court will exercise its jurisdiction in order to test the viability of a public policy. Thus, public policy will not be directly prone to judicial review, rather only in circumstances wherein fundamental right is violated. Now, suppose there is a policy that clearly discriminates two classes of people, which is based on sheer arbitrariness. Now, this is something that is not advisable and that goes against the nature of public policy, that goes against fundamental rights, that is violating the statute, and is also arbitrariness, that is, it does not have a reasoning behind its functioning or its coming into existence. Next. Courts cannot interfere on the grounds of apparent error in policy and availability of better alternatives. Now, the subject of judicial review, as we discussed, is quite limited and the legality of policy must only be tested. The legal ground of the policy must be tested. Please note, judicial review is narrowed down to see whether the policy is in consonance and in spirit with the law or is not in consonance or against the spirit of the law. So it is quite constrained and quite narrow in its scope. So there is not about wisdom or soundness of the policy. So the court will not see as to how viable the policy is going to be, rather how intellectually stimulative the policy is. Rather, it will only focus on the legal points and working on the legal aspect of the same. Now, let's see the statutory corporations in public policy. Now, there are autonomous corporate bodies in this, which are also called as public corporations, and they are created by a special act of the parliament or the state legislature. They have their own powers, functions, immunities, which are well defined in the legislation that has been passed. It also has financial autonomy and they are answerable to the legislature. Which are these? These are state-owned corporate bodies. Now, the state-owned corporate bodies, they are artificial judicial persons. They can be sued and they can sue. They are managed by a board of directors appointed by the government. For instance, we can take up the example of the railway, which is a state owned entity. It has a board of directors. It can sue and it can be sued by others as well. It can enter into contracts and purchase property. And as we know, Railways is one of the organizations that holds a large amount of land in India because it lays down the railway tracks. And for this purpose, it enters into various kinds of contracts to develop the land into railways, railway corridors. It purchases property. So it does the function what the government does for the welfare of the people. It has a common seal and a perpetual succession as well. It is fully owned and managed by the state. And the state is the initial capital investors, and the objective is purely public service, and it functions like a business entity. So, as we see, these are bodies that help the government to take their public policy to the people, to take their ideas and visions to the people in order to make the lives of the people much more easier and much more relevant in time. Then we have autonomous employee system. And this is not only for not government employees who are recruited and paid according to the rules of the entity. Then there is financial autonomy. They have financial independence and financial autonomy. They are exempt from rigid rules applicable to expenditure and public funds, not subject to audit regulations, and they can borrow money from the government and from the people. They can also list themselves in the stock market. They are answerable to the legislature. They enjoy freedom in terms of internal management, but when it comes to the external management, they are responsible to the legislature as to why a certain action was taken and the repercussions of the action. Why is it being faced in that regard? For example, the Life Insurance Corporation of India that ensures that almost every person in India has a life insurance or has any kind of insurance so that certain parts of their life are insured, which is a state-owned insurance company governed by the Life Insurance Corporation Act of 1956, and the objective is to spread insurance, especially in the rural areas, because it looks for the wider amplitude of welfare for the people, which is providing adequate financial cover at a reasonable cost. Then we have the Reserve Bank of India, which was established in 1935. It has come into existence through an act, a legislation, which is the Reserve Bank of India Act 1935, nationalized in 1949, and it is the highest organ that regulates the banking sector in India. It regulates the issue of banknotes. It is the only bank that looks after the currency circulation. It prints money when required. It keeps the reserves for the monetary stability. The other banks, they are commercial banks. Reserve Bank of India is a non-commercial bank. It is known as the banker of the banks because it acts as a banker to all the other commercial banks where people like you and me, friends, we keep our money. So it is the head of the banking institution and, in a manner, the head of the family. It operates the currency and credit system. It has a modern monetary policy framework, and it ensures and plays a critical role in maintaining price stability. It also faces the global fluctuations and ensures that inflation is taken and kept under steady roles. It has central and local boards, and plus it has a board for financial supervision. So it is present across states. It functions in a multitude of manner. There are various officers at various ranks who take care of the banking sector, and they regulate the entire banking economy in the country. Then we have the Food Corporation of India, established under the Food Corporations Act 1964, whose primary objective is to provide effective price support to the farmers. The distribution of food grains through the PDS system, that is the public distribution system. And this enters the rural India. It also acts as one of the backbone of providing grains to rural India. It provides food security for the entire nation in and across all times, and it is the reserve for the food security in India. It maintains a satisfactory level of buffer stocks of food grains, and it also takes up decisions as to how the crops are growing, which crop is in excess, and how the same needs or should be regulated. So please note, friends, organizations like these, they play a critical role in nation building. It may not seem, and their actions may not seem on a day-to-day basis, but their functions may not be felt on a day-to-day basis. But the reason they are functioning and they have been effectively functioning is that we know that the food stability in our country is quite stable. Next, the State Bank of India, which is also known as the banker to almost every Indian. It's an Indian multinational public sector undertaking and financial services company. It is a listed company in the stock market, wherein friends, people like you and me also can purchase share and be a part as the shareholder of the State Bank of India. Established under the Act of State Bank of India Act 1955, the objective is to encourage and mobilize savings. It encourages people to open bank accounts, and it has a provision of cooperative credit as well. It provides remittance services to banks and financial services to small and cottage industries, licensed warehouse banks. It plays a major role in giving loans to small scale farmers, or even large scale farmers for that matter, people who are aspiring to enter into the business market. It provides a big financial assistance to all these individuals. And also, as I said, the banker to almost every Indian living in the nook and corner of the country. Let's see this case, which is Sukhdev Singh versus Bhagatram Sardar Singh Raghuvanshi. It's a 1975 judgment that held that statutory corporations given birth by statutes, and there are three features that should be there in a statutory corporation. First, rules and regulations framed have the force of law. They come into existence by an act, by a legislation. The employees have a statutory status as well. Why? Because they are employees under a certain legislation. They are employees for a certain reason. Then dismissal of employees not in contravention to the act. So you also need to take care of that the people who are employed, they are not ousted by the provisions that goes against the spirit and word of the act. Now, statutory corporations and not state are under Article 12, and only a constitutional statutory authority comes within other authorities under Article 12. Ramana Dayaram Shetty versus International Airport Authority of India. Now, if we see what are the merits of these organizations and what are the demerits of these organizations, if we compare the State Bank of India with the private sector bank, for instance, say the HDFC Bank, now not every citizen in the country can open a bank account in a private bank because they have certain rules and regulations. They have a certain limit in which you have to keep your savings account. There has to be a certain stability in your savings bank, and there has to be a minimum cash amount that needs to be there in your saving bank account. So the merits of such kinds of institutions, say the Food Security of India or the State Bank of India, are that they have expert managers in their management. They have administrative authority to seek for the best of their people. They can carve out little policies that work out for the best interest in the working of the people. They can be initiative, they can be innovative, and they can also be flexible in their working. And also, being a statutory organization, they have the ability to take quick decisions in order to reach the objectives of its policy soon. And the motto, as since it is a government entity or a state entity or a government undertaken entity, it's service. It's not a profit making entity, rather, it's a service entity or a service model entity that is there for the people. The staff is efficient, it is easier for them to raise capital because they are state undertakings. So if they require, the state, the central or the state government will definitely come for their assistance. But however, there is the other side of the coin too. As it said, every coin has two sides. The demerits, it's hierarchical and autonomy. So it works in a particular structure. It's quite rigid in its working. They would not want to change its kind of working. At times, there is a lack of initiative as well. And since there are people working on different levels, at times there is a clash of interest, unfair practices, and if not the best suitability, at times it's not even suitable. So the pros and cons can be weighed on a scale, but in a sense, if we see the merit side of it, we need to keep in mind one very important point, that is the service motive. And therefore, these organizations, though may not be profit making entities, but they play a critical role in maintaining the stability in the economy, in giving the common man in India the life that they aspire and the life that they actually deserve, and all the other benefits that any private bank or any private institution can give. These state owned governments are trying their level best. The state owned entities are trying their level best to level up and match up to the private players. However, there will be certain disproportionate partialities here and there, but it works out to the benefit of all. Then there are government companies as well. Companies like Bharat Petroleum, Indian Oil Corporation, which looks after the crude oil and the distribution of fossil and crude across the various parts of India. And then there are companies like Shell, and there is a clear demarcation and a clear cut change in prices that is there. So, company or association, central or state government, or central and state government combined own at least 51% of the paid up share capital. So, a government company will be a company in which the government has 51% stake and 49% is being held by rest of the people, and they are also referred to as public sector undertakings. And the reason why these companies are so important and relevant is because they achieve significant equity with distribution of wealth of citizens. And they help in nation building by ensuring that the growth of the nation happens along with its people and not just a particular sector of people they grow. So the ideology of a capitalist economy is not there, rather a mixture of capitalist and socialist wherein both can thrive at the same time. And it is suitable because private sector companies, along with PSUs, are needed for strategic growths. And even private sector companies can be a shareholder and also can be a member in these companies. So the PSUs, they join hands with the private sector companies who lack financial arrangements to fulfill its objectives. There have been various organizations that have been diluted by the government, wherein the private players or the private entity is taking a large amount of stake and they're ensuring that the unit turns into a profit making entity. For example, the Power Finance Corporation Limited, Chennai Petroleum Corporation Limited. These are all examples wherein the private sector and the government sector, they are coming hand in hand with each other. Now, this form is convenient when the government has to take over an existing enterprise, because if the government realizes that it is a loss making entity, the government will come and involve a private sector or will try to infuse more money. For example, BSNL, the Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited. We may think that the same is an outdated telecom industry or a telecom company right now. But please note that at places where the towers or the signal of companies like Geo or Reliance Geo, Vodafone, Airtel, sorry, does not reach the towers of BSNL reaches, because BSNL is not only a profit making entity, but it also plays a crucial role in establishing towers at border areas where there is a very thin population, because it is a service oriented, a welfare company for its people, because people need connectivity, and it also plays a major role in national security, because you need signals, you need inputs, you need data from those places, and companies like this actually hold the backbone of the government that provides security to the entire landmass. Then the second point, government wishes to manage an enterprise in association with private enterprises. Now, the undertaking, it's a government undertaking with 15% stake, but the people who are managing it, they can be deputed from private companies who are doing well. They can come and take care of the company's functioning. So this is where private players also enter the domain of the private and government sector undertakings, and there is competition with private sector requiring operational autonomy always. But there are compulsions by donor countries for specific form of organization. Now, this is convenient when the government can be in a position to take decisions, can be in a position to take quick and rapid decisions for its people and see what works out best for its individuals. Then, the features are that it is a distinct legal entity which has a separate existence. It has its rights and duties of shareholders which are different from company. It is formed in compliance with either the Companies Act 1956 or the Companies Act 2013, which controls itself with a strict management. There are proper written rules and regulations in the form of memorandum of articles or memorandum of association, which lays down the objective of the company and the rules for its internal management. And it's supported by government shareholding and private stock holding, and the companies subscribed by the government of India are not owned by it. And these companies can also go and raise funds on the stock exchange. And when the government engages in trade, the position of the company is not of a political state or a political government. It is of an entity who is entering into the business domain, and it's evaluated by a central government nominated authority. Generally, authority responsible is the CAG's office, that's the Controller and Auditor General of India, which keeps a tab on these industries, on these organizations, on these particular institutions who are helping the nation reach great heights. Now, in the case of Ramana Dayaram Shetty versus the National Airport Authority of India, we can see that an entity is called an agency when the entire share capital of it is held by the government. There is pervasive existence of state control. It has state protected entity having monopoly status, functions related to that of government, and there are so many other things. And on the right hand, you can see the entities that are owned by the government, right from BPCL, BHEL to Coal India Limited, GAIL, HAL, which is playing a major role in ensuring that the defense sector gets indigenized helicopters and fighter jets that is homegrown, which also gives a lot of boost to the country's internal defense sector, and that too given India's unique geopolitical position. ONGC, NTPC, Steel Authority of India, which actually form the backbone for all these companies. And if we closely look, all these companies, they work as a catalyst to one another. The steel that HAL is getting, it can be provided by SAIL. So it's providing a backdrop or a backbone to each other so that the government together as an entity can be strong in business as well as in administration. Now, what is the significance of all these? Now, the economics of sale. Now, where there is huge amount of capital required that the private sector cannot infuse, this is dealt by the public sector. For example, electric power plants, natural gas, petroleum, the defense sector. It may not be that every private player can infuse such large amount of money, because this huge chunk of money is only there with the government, and they have the robust stature to take up such projects. Then you also need to maintain regional balance in the geopolitical area. For the overall development, the economically backward areas also need to be touched. And therefore, the government entities, they establish their institutions, factories, or their corporations at even the remotest area of India, because you need to give and generate employment. And this is something that the private players may or may not undertake. Then the PSUs take charge in underprivileged areas. So they make and bring the balance in this entire area and the development of the infrastructure. Now, when there is a project that's actually unfurling at a particular place, the infrastructure also gets developed, and the government invested for development actually develops the particular area. Now, once an industry comes up, officers will come up, employees will come up, people will come up. Now, when all these people come up, you need the resources or facilities like hospitals, schools, healthcare centers, medicine shops. You need markets, you need supermarkets, or any market wherein these people can buy their essential services or the essential goods and items. So, all these they eventually go on to develop the infrastructure, and the private sector unwillingly may or may not would want to contribute in this. And another reason why the private sector would not want to contribute in these areas is because the gestation period is quite long. By the time these entities turn into a profit making entity, it may take up to a decade, and the amount of capital infused is huge. And every private individual who would infuse such a large amount of money would want some kind of return, if not also a huge 100% profit. Then a control on monopoly and restrictive trade practices. So PSUs control the monopoly created by private sector companies. It checks on the guidelines of monopolistic and restrictive trade practices. Not everyone can buy from all the brands that are there, so the government has to enter in order to balance the various private sectors, wherein there are companies who are only operating for the purpose of profit. And as said, these companies have the motto of service. They are doing a service for the nation, not a profit making entity. Then we have the import substitution point, wherein the PSUs are engaged in manufacturing and production of capital equipment, which was earlier imported from other countries. Today, we are exporting such products. So, only when the government can give that boost to the private sector, they would also come up in these areas and then strengthen India's trade with other countries. Now, let's see the limitations and advantages out here. So the advantages of these companies are that the provisions of the Companies Act are pursued. There is internal autonomy. There is flexibility in the decision making. There is control of the local market, curbing of unhealthy business practices as well. On the other hand, there is limitation wherein there is external interference, not answerable to the parliament, political motivations, and at times there is governmental inefficiency as well in all these kinds of projects, because there is a lot of bureaucracy that is involved in the functioning of these entities. Now, let's see the difference between a statutory corporation and a government company. A statutory corporation is created by a special act of parliament or state legislature, whereas a government company is directly formed under the Companies Act of 1956 or 2013. Board of directors is nominated by the government. In the case of government, the board of directors is nominated by the government, and the government is also the shareholder. Government subscribes to the full capital. Government subscribes to 51% of the capital in a government company. There is no scope for private participation in a statutory corporation, wherein in a government company there is scope for private participation in capital management. Statutory corporations, they are bound to work within the provisions of the Act. Government companies functions on the basis of business, on the basis of commercial principles. 6. Subject to restrictions imposed by the government, and government companies enjoy a greater autonomy. 7. Corporations are accountable to public through the legislature. Government and concerned ministry are accountable to the public in case of government companies. Now, There are certain projects in which the government enters into a joint venture with other companies. Which are these companies? Wherein there is a business arrangement of two or more parties wherein they agree to pool their resources. They share risks to accomplish a specific task. For example, Tata entered into a public private partnership with a company in West Bengal to make a water treatment plant for the city of Haldia. Now, this is where the private and the government undertaking join hands. A state government and a private entity, they join hands through its another arm called JASCO. Then, task can be a new project or business activity where the government does not have an expertise, or where the private sector does not have an expertise, or the private sector has an expertise but does not has the money. So the government can infuse the money, the private sector can come in the managerial and the management position. Now, each participant is responsible for profit, losses, and the costs that are incurred. Now, venture is a separate legal entity in this case, partnership in the colloquial sense, and the aim is to enter or to take the business into the foreign market, which again depends on how the management of the company would take the company forward. Now, let's see why generally a joint venture agreement is come or does come into picture. First is to leverage resources, second to reduce costs, third to combine expertise, and fourth to enter foreign markets. Now, these are formed through an agreement that lists rights and obligations, objectives, initial contributions of the parties, day-to-day operations, right to the profit, responsibility of losses. Now, in this case, Fakir Chand Gulati versus Upal Agencies Limited, JV association of persons to carry out a single business. Association through an implied express contract, there is community interest as to purpose of undertaking, stands in relation to principal and agent. Now, what are the pros and cons of a joint venture agreement? Let us see. The pros and cons of a joint venture agreement are it gives a new business opportunity to both the private individual and the government undertaking. It reduces the cost and risk because you have the money in safe hands, because you have the best people in field who are holding your money too. Then it starts with the broader base of knowledge and a pool of talent who can actually get the work done in the best possible manner. But there are cons as well, because when there is a good thing, there will be a bad thing as well. The cons are there can be a relinquishment of certain degree of control. The same goals and equal degree of commitment may or may not be there. Increase in number of management of teams. Any change in business structure wholly affects the joint venture, because the team that actually comes, if that moves out, a new team comes into place, which is quite evident given it's a joint venture agreement. The entire project can go for a toss, and difference in the working of the company and the management style. So when the project completes, how will the exit strategy be? What will be the sale of the new business, a spin-off of the operations, the employee ownership, who will be accountable in such a reason? And one of the case studies that can be very relevant is, which is not a JV, but per se, we can read the study of Sony Ericsson, the case of Sony Ericsson, how it went down. Then, corruption and good governance that plays a very critical role in this regard, which is how corruption affects the gain out of such undertakings, which is a major obstacle to good governance. Now, it affects and undermines the trust in public institutions. Now, when there is corruption, there will be mismanagement of public resources, there will be poor delivery of service, there will be reinforcement of marginalization in economic life, and it impacts the ability to fulfill human rights obligations. And India ranks 85th amongst 180 countries as per the Corruption Perceptions Index 2022. And this is something that will work on the good governance side. This needs to be improved on an individual, departmental, state, and central level. Next, governments can combat corruption by implementing policies that promote transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. And then there are anti corruption agencies as well, which are Central Vigilance Commission, Central Bureau of Investigation, Lokpal and Lokayukta. These will be dealt in detail in the further lectures, and I will just be giving a snippet of what these actually do. The Central Vigilance Commission was set up in the year 1964. Now, when in the case of the Hawala case of 1993, that is Vineet Narayan versus Union of India, the CBI failed to investigate allegations of public corruption. So the guidelines were laid down to ensure independence and autonomy of the CBI, and the CBI placed under the supervision of the Central Vigilance Commission, which is an independent governmental agency free from executive control. And today, Central Vigilance Commission Act has been passed in the year 2003. It provides powers to inquire into the offences committed under the Preventions of Corruptions Act 1988 by public servants, statutory corporations, people working in such corporations, government companies, societies, and local authorities owned or controlled by the government. In the case of Union of India versus KV Janki Raman, it was held that CVC has no power to give sanction for prosecuting a public servant, and the power exclusively vested with the employer of the civil servant. In a recent case, in the case of Hira Nayak, it was held that when a particular employer of a department needs to be sanctioned, criminally prosecuted for charges of corruption, the head of the department plays a crucial role in giving the sanction order that yes, you can go ahead and prosecute this particular person. Otherwise, the head of the department can say, we will run a departmental inquiry first, and then you can come up with the prosecution of this particular civil servant. And CVC, it's a three-member body consisting of the Central Vigilance Commissioner and two Vigilance Commissioners. The members are appointed on recommendation of high-powered committee consisting of the Prime Minister, Minister of Home Affairs, and the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha. And the Act confers adequate independence and functions for the autonomy to the CVC. Then we have the Central Bureau of Investigation, set up by a resolution of the Union Government on the 1st of April 1963, not the April Fool's Day, but quite not in that manner. It derives power to investigate from the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act 1946, and it has jurisdiction over all the union territories and states with consent of the state government, and functioning under the Department of Personal Ministry, Ministry of Personal, Pension and Public Grievances. It's a premier investigating agency in India. And the divisions are Anti-Corruption Division, Economic Offences Division, and Special Crimes Division. All the three have their own separate functioning. The Anti-Corruption Division, as the name goes, looks up into the corruption cases. Economic offences looks up into the white-collar crimes, and the Special Crimes Division looks up into the heinous crimes that takes place in the country. Then we have the Directorate of Prosecution, Administration Division, Policy and Coordination Division, Central Forensic Science Laboratory. Now, all these have their own specific working. They have their own specific way to work. Anti-Corruption Division entrusted with cases involving public servants under states or center involving interests of central government, PSU, statutory corporation, government companies, etc., breaching central laws, crime on the airlines, crime on the high seas, involving serious cases of fraud, cheating, embezzlement in public joint stock companies, and involving collection of intelligence and corruption in the public services and public sector. Then we have the Lokpal and Lokayukta, which came into existence through the Lokpal and Lokayuktas Act of 2013 that provides for the establishment for a Lokpal for the union government and each Lokayukta for the states. It's a statutory body, functions and performs through the ombudsman, inquires into the allegations of corruptions against public functionaries. Mandatory. It has become a mandate to establish a Lokayukta for all the states. It mandates all public officials to furnish their assets and liabilities of themselves and their dependents. Now, the jurisdiction. The inquiries against allegations of corruption against the Prime Minister, ministers, members of Parliament, state, central, and legislative assemblies, Group A, B, C, and D officers and officials of central government, powers, superintendence and issuance of direction to the CBI, case referred to CBI by Lokpal cannot be transferred without its approval. The inquiry wing of the Lokpal has powers as good as the civil code. It can confiscate assets, proceeds, receipts, and benefits procured by means of corruption, can recommend transfer or suspension of public servant. Then we have the anti corruption laws that look into the functioning of these institutions when and if there are points and concerns of corruption. It can give directions to prevent the destruction of records during preliminary inquiry. Now, anti corruption laws, it's for the Prevention of the Corruption Act of 1988, Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002, Right to Information Act 2005, Public Interest Disclosure and Protection of Informers Resolution Act 2004, Lokpal and Lokayukta Act of 2013. Now, all these things, they look into the offenses, punishment, and the working of these institutions and the workings of these various legislations. The Money Laundering Act works in order to criminalize legalizing income profits from illegal sources, and it looks after various kinds of illegal channelizing and economic crimes, which also proceeds to the confiscation of property that has been derived from money laundering and matters that are related with regards to the same. And money laundering is a punishable offense with rigorous imprisonment. The Enforcement Directorate also plays a major role in this case, especially in cases that come under the PMLA. Then you have the Right to Information Act, wherein any citizen in India has the power to ask the government how the money is being spent or how the government actually works. And it has been used widely to uncover corruption, progress in government work, expenses related to information, etc. And the objectives have been to empower citizens to question the government, promote transparency and accountability in working of the government, help in containing corruption in the government, envisage better informed citizens keeping necessary vigil on government machinery. So basically, the purpose of the Right to Information Act is that the government remains in check from the people, but the people should also be aware of their rights. Where and when can they step in? Then we have the Public Interest Disclosure and Protection of Information Informers Resolution Act 2004, wherein the identity of the complainant is protected because in these matters, certain kinds of people are involved, which puts a potent threat to life and liberty. Then we come to the last point on good governance, wherein you require a legitimate, accountable, and effective way of obtaining and using public resources in pursuit of widely accepted social goals and all kinds of institutional structures that promote both substantive outcome and public legitimacy. So, good governance, in a sense, is nothing but working for the welfare of the society at large that improves the life of the citizens, that works in achieving the sustainable development goals and to develop the well being of the human being in its essence. It works on various facets and on various fronts as well. Now, what are the principles of good governance? We can just have a look. It needs to be participatory, it needs to be consistent with the rule of law, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be responsive, it needs to be consensus and objectively driven and equitable and inclusive. And the indicators of good governance are existence and quality of procedures, levels of capacity, output, and estimates from direct observation. And all these things are conducted by the government through various organizations. For examples, the levels of capacity or existence and quality of procedures, the output. There are various exams that takes place in India, which is conducted by the Union Public Service Commission, commonly known as UPSC, or the State Public Service Commission, that actually goes on to depth and sees as to how and which kind of people should we select, who can come into the government department and take the principle of good governance to meet it into a reality. And transparency is one of the most essential elements in good governance. You need to make aware the public the functioning of the government. People must know who, why, what, how, and how much. Who is responsible? Why should this action be taken? What was the need for the action to be taken? How was the action taken? And what was the cost incurred in the action being taken? So the public hold power for the common good, and the components are availability of information, government policies and actions, clear sense of organizational responsibility, assurance of government effect, efficiently administered, corruption free of government system, and informed citizenry is one of the most important elements in good governance. With this, thank you so much.